Welcome everyone to our webinar entitled Auto Classify and Identify Documents and Records in different repositories. So file shares, Office 365, Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. We're going to go ahead and start on time right now. The recording for the webinar and the presentation will be made available to you via email. So within usually a couple of days, we'll get an email out to you with the links back to our website where we publish those and the webinars we've previously done. Next. So just quick introductions here. My name is David Kruglov. I'm Managing Director with ShareSquared. I'm going from the bottom up. Jim Duncan is our Chief Architect, and Jim is a SharePoint Certified Master. And then we're joined by Robert Pedo from Netrix. He's the VP of Content Services. If you don't know, Netrix acquired a company called Concept Searching. We've been a Concept Searching partner for, I would say, 8 or 10 years, and we continue to implement their product for auto classification use cases. And so sometimes you may hear me say Concept Searching. I'm trying to train myself to say Netrix, but for today's purposes, they're synonymous. Next, please, Jim. Okay, we always like to set an intention for the webinar. This is a way to kind of create a context for how you listen to us, right? So this is not a sales pitch. Our intention is to teach, not present. And in that, you'll see that some of the slides are fairly wordy, and that's on purpose. The intent there is to teach you things, and providing just bullet points doesn't often convey the entire information that we're trying to convey. And also, we're going to distribute the presentation, and we're hoping that some of the slides are standalone. They're self-sufficient, so you can share them with your colleagues and explain them to other people yourselves without having Jim or Robert or me on the call with you, although we're happy to be on a call. So that's the intent. We're going to spend the time distinguishing the meaning and the need for document classification. We're going to share some ideas and solutions for how you might automate classification. You can do it manually. We will suggest that that's a very difficult thing to do in some cases. Overall, we've done, I think, 6 webinars, and we've got a few more scheduled, and we'll continue to do these. And the intent there is to foster a community of people who want to improve collaboration and records management solutions. And I think we've got a lot of those kinds of people on the line. There's 146 attendees on this particular webinar. We've had as many as 460 on some of our other webinars, and a lot of repeat people. So it's great to have people continue to be part of that community. We'll try to answer any questions you have. We're going to do an extended QA at the end, so we'll present or teach for an hour, and then we'll go 15 minutes of QA. And we've been promising to get the QA out in written format for all of the series and still have not done that. So I want to acknowledge that that's out of integrity, and we're going to get that cleaned up and get the QA out. And then the last bullet is that we want to enroll you into being in action. So it's great for us to share information. It's great for you to be learning, creating ideas, but if you don't take some of these things that you're learning and put them into action, it really makes no difference in the real world, right? So everything from ideas we've had around records management to content classification to email management, we want to be a resource for you to be in action and actually implement these. And for us to be able to do that, we probably have to talk to you directly outside of the context of a webinar. So you're going to be invited to reach out to us or let us know how we can reach out to you so that we can actually get some action in the real world with your solutions. Okay, so the agenda today is, what do we mean by classification? Why do we care about it? And what are some of the use cases? We'll then move into taxonomy, and we'll define what we mean by that. We are oriented around SharePoint and Office 365 solutions and Microsoft Teams and that world, so the Microsoft suite of technologies. So always when we're talking on these webinars, it's from that standpoint, but there are parallels in other content management systems. You would have, where we have content types, you'll have document types, say in a FileNet or an OpenText. So generally speaking, the definitions still play. Then Jim will demonstrate something we call our information architecture workbook. We flashed it on the screen in the past, but now we're going to spend a little more time on it. And we're going to show you how we design and then deploy or implement taxonomy for intranet collaboration solutions where search is important, for records management applications where we're trying to manage the content against the retention schedule. And you'll see how it ties into classification. So then Robert will take over. He'll do an overview of the approach and technology that Netrix uses and some of their differentiators. And then he'll do a demonstration of the product, and you'll see how it leverages the taxonomy we talked about in the prior section. And then we'll close up and we'll do the extended QA. Okay, so what is classification in this context? And I say in this context because it may mean different things to different people. What we're talking about is telling the system, and I mentioned earlier SharePoint or Office 365, what the purpose the document serves and how to treat it. So what is its purpose? Well, it's a contract or an invoice. How to treat it, we want to be able to find only invoices in the system, not just documents that have the word invoice, but actual invoices. We want to be able to attach a retention disposition policies to a document according to its type. So we want to identify the document against a list of known document types, and that supports search. So search refiners and search in Office 365 require content types and metadata to do the refining. We want to be able to identify what record series or category the document belongs to so that we can apply the correct retention and disposition policy to that document. So an employee record has a very different life cycle than, say, an invoice or the company barbecue menu, right? So we want to be able to appropriately deal with the life cycle of document. And then we do that through assigning the content type and capturing metadata. And when we have the metadata, that can be used, as I said, to refine search. So I can find all invoices from ShareSquared, to filter list views. So if you're in a document library view, you can filter that view. And then also to do workflows. So I use invoice as an example a lot. If I've extracted, let's say, the invoice amount as part of a document scanning and OCR operation, I can then refine by invoices. That would be documents with the content type invoice associated with them from ShareSquared, which is the vendor field piece of metadata, and then in a range between, say, $5,000 and $10,000. So I've got my amount field now I can use. So you can see that it all builds together to support search and sort of the user experience. And then lastly, the Netrix data classification product or suite of products are what we call white box application, meaning you can see how they work, you can tune them, you can provide clues, you can make adjustments, you can take out false positives, you can up the priority or meaning of a particular term or set of terms so that the classification engine is more accurate versus an AI or machine learning based application, which is somewhat of a black box. So in that case, you train the engine over time by feeding it a number of examples, and then it does its magic and comes back with what it thinks is correct. And it gets tuned by getting fed examples, but the Netrix product is much quicker to becoming accurate because you can do that tuning and you see what's happening immediately. Next, please, Jim. Okay, so why do we care? Why go through the effort? Well, there's a number of stats here. Knowledge workers spend about 2.5 hours a day, or 30% of the workday, searching for information. That's according to IDC. On average, every misfiled document costs $125 and a lost document costs $700. That's just one document, right? So multiply that by the number of knowledge workers you have, people who are searching for content, working with content, and then multiply it by the number of documents they can't find, and then multiply it by their the time times their hourly rate, and you're going to see that's a very large number. And then AIM says up to 80% of electronically stored information is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. So it doesn't have business value and should probably be deleted or archived or moved away from the transactional system where content lives. Security. In the US, a data breach costs a company on average $8.19 million, according to the Ponemon Institute, and it's a study that was done with IBM. And companies with security or automation technologies like Netrix experience half the cost with regard to breaches. And lastly, information governance, less than 50% of the content is correctly indexed, tagged, or efficiently searchable. That's what we're talking about today. That one's straight on point to what we're doing. 67% of data loss in records management is due to end user error. And some of that end user error might be tagging something inappropriately. So tagging a document with the wrong content type or setting the wrong metadata, so that when the records management policies are applied, which happens automatically with the products we work with, the wrong policies applied, which means the document might be set for destruction before it's supposed to. And without effective governance, most metadata projects will fail, according to Forrester. Okay, so these are some of the use cases where you really relate to where you have content. What is the repositories where you have content? So one of the probably most popular one is file shares. And what does auto classification do? It analyzes the documents, it assigns the content type, and adds metadata. And in this case, when it's file shares, the metadata is added as custom properties of the document. So we don't have the rich kind of structure that a content type provides, but Netrix is smart enough to look at the existing taxonomy and apply properties to the document. So if you were to right mouse click on a document right now, if you went to Windows Explorer, you would see it has properties for when it was last modified, as an example. This adds custom properties to the document that can then be used to determine whether it's raw, and also to drive what we call an intelligent migration. In other words, we already know that that file share content, we've already identified. We already know that this is an invoice, and this is part of an employee record, and this is a contract. That's what Netrix does. So by running the product against a file share, you get a much more intelligent migration, and you can decide more effectively what to move and what not to. And in our experience, you cannot expect end users to identify or tag content due to the volume. We've seen a lot of organizations try. You know, we had a guy that was in his 60s that they had 1 million documents. He said his job was to identify them, and then he'd get back to us. And I think he retired before that happened. Obviously, you know, first of all, to identify the content requires lots of different people in an organization, and most people have regular jobs that, you know, this is just a nuisance to them. So we haven't seen that be very effective. In SharePoint Office 365, the second use case, Netrix assigns the content type, adds metadata. In this case, the metadata is stored in the existing content types, so it also uses the existing taxonomy. And why you might want to consider it is end users don't do this very reliably. They, you know, there's a joke I've heard that a lot of documents turn out being related to asbestos because A is the first item on the pick list. You know, asbestos shows up first. So it's just not something that end users are used to doing, and honestly, it's extra work for them. And then lastly, you'll see that Netrix can classify documents when they're uploaded to SharePoint. So it does that analysis as the document is uploaded. It says, please wait, classification in process. It determines the content type, adds metadata. We found that this significantly enhances user adoption because users don't want to do this extra work. They want to, they just want to move on with their daily business. And when they're using file shares and other content repositories, they're not asked for extra metadata. So this takes that extra work out of the picture for them and increases standardization and reliability. Okay, so we're gonna do a quick poll. What are your top initiatives? We kind of just bucket these, you know, for the kinds of workloads that we typically see. And I'm going to launch the first poll. We'll give you a little bit of time to respond. We love it if you respond. There's no penalty for not responding, but are you, you can select as many as apply, but are you focused on, you know, collaboration, intranet, end user adoption, compliance and records management, content migration, or identifying that redundant, obsolete, and trivial content, or process automation? And there may be some others, but we can only have up to 5 picks. So choose the ones that are most interesting to you. And we'll give it about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to close the poll. 5. Everybody in? Okay, I'm closing them. And then here's the results. So 30% on collaboration and intranet, 32% on end user adoption. 89, I'm not surprised in a way, only because our audience is made up of a lot of records managers, I think. That's who's in our CRM and who's regularly attended the webinars. A lot of people dealing with raw, a lot of what we call unstructured content in documents that organizations don't know what it is. And then process automation would be, electronic forms and workflow. Very high valued activity, but typically happens after some of these other things. So perfect. We'll share the results of the polls with you when we send out the deck. Okay, a lot of words, like I said. I'm going to get through this this slide, and then we're going to have Jim do some demos. But we wanted to define taxonomy for you. This was a quote from Microsoft site. A taxonomy groups the words, labels, and terms that describe something, and then arranges the groups into a hierarchy. You'll see a little bit of the hierarchy or hierarchical nature of content types when Jim demos what we've got, or he can speak to that a little bit. But in Office 365 and SharePoint, you have the ability to do what's called inheritance. So you can have parent content types and then their children, and they inherit the fields from them. It's a very elegant solution, and it reduces the overall number of content types because you get a certain amount of reuse through inheritance. So that's supported through content types and term sets. Content types are assigned to documents. As I mentioned, when you upload a document, or you have a document in SharePoint, you can use Netrix to do this automatically. You assign a content type that essentially identifies that document. So an invoice will have its own content type, or could be a financial document. An employee record might be a case record, but there's a content type and metadata for it. And then so the document is a Word document. That doesn't change. That's also kind of metadata in a way, but that's its format. The content type in my example is an invoice, and the amount field is the metadata. So in this case, I said $5,000, and you can do those workflows and filtering views and things based on that metadata. Term sets are a list of related terms. Think of just a list of words. They limit the values that can be put in the fields of a content type. So think of a drop-down list box in a typical application. I have to pick from the list, male, female, or other, I don't know. And they provide consistency in the way things are named versus free-form text fields where people can type in anything they want. The problem with that is, people will put in human resources, HR, H period, R period, human RES, and all the variations of that. And then when you try to pull it back out by search or do something else with that document, you're thwarted by the variations in the way it's been identified. So not very helpful. And content types drive workflows such as search, workflow, list views and filters, and then document and records management. Okay, now we're going to turn things over to Jim and get some demos for you. Let me make you.
I'm already presented.
You are already presenter, of course.
Thanks, David. Yeah. And I'll assume my voice has come through.
It is. Go ahead.
Okay, so for our demonstration here today, where we're at is we're in a made-up organization in their modern intranet built on Office 365 and SharePoint Online. We are in the team site, the private collaboration space for the accounting team for this made-up organization. And their team site is joined to the company hub. So we have all the hub navigation. We can get to pretty much anywhere on the intranet from here if we need to. So this is part of a bigger taxonomy. We're focusing just on one team within the organization, in this case, the accounting team, and their team site. And our scenario is that the accounting team has been given this team site and told to store their documents in the document library that came with their team site. Nothing else has been done. A little bit of branding has been done here. You might notice that it doesn't look exactly like SharePoint does out of the box, but that's our starting point. So the accounting team has started to use this document library to store all the documents that they care about as a team. Out of the box with SharePoint, this is kind of the metadata that we get for each document in this library. We have the name of the file, We have when it was created and who did that. We have when it was last modified and who did that. And that's kind of it. There are some more columns out of the box from SharePoint that we could add to our view if we want, like the version number, if we care about that. But this is pretty much it for metadata. Now, for a search experience, this does help. This is a little bit better than if all these documents were just in a file share. Okay, so for an example, I can type the word invoice. Oops, helps if I spell it right. And if we look, I get some results here. So I get an invoice here, invoice. This one is not an invoice. This is our invoice processing instructions, this Word document down here. But because it has the keyword invoice in it, it's coming back up as a result. So the search box is looking at both the file names and any metadata that the documents have, as well as the contents of the document itself. But that's kind of it. So if you don't have any extra metadata, the best you can do when you're doing a search is to, let's just expand the search a little bit so we can get some ideas of what the out-of-the-box search experience looks like. So again, I'm just searching for the word invoice, and I can filter by time when it was last modified. That's kind of it. When I'm looking at all the results in the accounting team site that match the keyword search of invoice, if I switch to just looking at files, then I can also drill in by format, PDF, Word, picture. But that's kind of it. Not a super great experience if you're, trying to find a specific invoice or a specific collection of invoices. One, we've got false positives. This isn't an invoice. Doesn't help me. And you'll notice that you might notice, let me just step back a couple steps here, and you might notice that this bill 2305 acme inc.pdf is not coming up in my search results for an invoice, for the keyword invoice. And that's because it doesn't have the word invoice in it. That particular vendor calls it a bill, and it came in via email, and it was scanned in maybe, and whatever. But it was just dropped in this document library. SharePoint doesn't know it's an invoice. And even worse, I can't tell that it's an invoice without opening the document. I can't search for it and find it because it doesn't have my keyword invoice. So that's kind of a real high-level breeze through of the built-in capabilities when you don't do any extra work related to taxonomy in SharePoint. But depending on a user's permission, we'll see that I'm an admin on this site, so I have full control. And typically members of the site can do this same thing. I can add columns to this library. So let's say that I want to add a column for my amount. So I can just start filling this in. I can say I want to add a new column, give it a name. Nobody ever puts in a description, but this is the amount of the invoice with my terrible typing. And I can choose some settings, right? So depending on the type of data that I choose here, I get different settings that I can set. But as an information architect, as someone who's responsible for the taxonomy of my organization, I don't really just want end users being able to do that. As part of governance, we typically change the permissions that members have. Well, we bring them down from this level of permissions to just focusing on content, and we assign someone else on the team that knows how to do this kind of thing correctly. To give them the permissions that are needed to add new columns to the library. This is like adding a new column to a database table. This is like adding a new column to an Excel file, an Excel workbook, a table in Excel workbook that everyone in the organization potentially is dependent upon to do their job. So having new columns and things just added on the fly is not necessarily the best way to go about this. That is the default from Microsoft, though. Any member of the team can just add columns. So we're going to pretend that we've done that. How are we doing, David, on time? We're still doing
I was
good?
just going to give you a time check. We're trying to have you complete in about 5 minutes, but and we can
Okay,
go a little bit
got it.
long. But
All right.
yeah, I don't know where
So
you're at.
zooming ahead a little bit, we've done a little bit of extra work on this library now. So I just switched to a view called promoted metadata, and we'll see that we have these extra columns now that weren't here before. They're just included in the view. They're part of the library. They just weren't shown on that particular view called all documents, but they are shown on this view. And now I've got a number, a place to put the invoice number. I've got the amount, and I've got the due date, along with a document type that I've assigned. Okay, so that lets me do things without even searching, just like sorting by my oldest invoices or my newest ones, the ones that are have a due date in the past. In this case, I can do the same thing with numbers. I can group by numbers. I can do larger and smaller. I can filter by amount. So I only want to see that one invoice, those two invoices that are over 5,000. And just by clicking a couple boxes, I've done that. Okay, so that helps quite a bit. I can do quite a bit now in this library that I wasn't able to do before. Imagine if this library had 2,500 documents in it with no metadata. The only metadata that I had was what I get from SharePoint out of the box. Wouldn't be such a great experience. But once we do start having some additional columns, then our search, and sorry, I should have opened that in a new tab. Let me do that. So our search starts to get better. Okay, so our normal search, we search for invoice, and these are a set of open source modern search web parts from the P&P community, easy to install and use. But this is the default kind of search experience that we looked at, just with a little more information on it and a little more functionality by installing some new software in our tenant. But now, I get a little bit more. I can refine by result type and modified, and this time also by content type. So switching back to our library, we're going to jump forward to the future a little bit, and we're going to pretend that we've noticed patterns in how these fields are filled out for different kinds of documents in here, and we're going to define some content types. We're going to say we've got a content type that we're going to call an invoice, and we're going to add some fields to that. So if we look at the invoice, an example of an invoice, we've got not just the name and title, but we've also got some extra metadata that we can add. Document owner, in case someone else is responsible for this document, not me as the person who uploaded it, but someone else. I could put their name in here. I can provide a quick description of the document if I want. We've got a true document date. SharePoint will automatically keep track of when a document was created, first uploaded or created in SharePoint, and when it was last modified. Neither of those two dates are likely to be the date that's printed on my invoice. So that's what I use the true document date for. And these other columns related to an invoice. We've also got content type in here, our invoice processing instructions, which is not an invoice, remember. That's been assigned a content type called business process document, which has different fields. Once we get past the shared ones, okay, I guess that one doesn't have any extras. But now that we've defined our specific content types, our search experience gets a lot better. Not this one, sorry, this one. So now we can refine by invoice, and I no longer get the guidance for for processing an invoice. I also do get that one that is called the bill. So I've searched for the keyword invoice, which doesn't appear in this document or any of its metadata, but because its content type is an invoice, I see it when I filter by content type. So pretty useful. Jumping ahead just one more step. Now that we've got our content types assigned, we can create a view in the library that shows just the invoices that are in here without me having to step out and go to search to find the invoices. So the taxonomy gives us a cool way to be able to slice and dice our data right in the context of SharePoint. And then we can save those views for later, like I've done over here. We've got a few. Here's invoices by content type, but only those that have come from a vendor. So the next level of classification beyond the content type, getting us closer towards being able to identify it as a category from our retention schedule, is this field called the document type. And the document type is one of those term sets that David mentioned. So when I'm in here and I'm looking to set the value for the document type, I have a list of options. Okay, so that one, there's invoice, and then here's vendor invoice. Okay, this can be further refined. So let's pretend that I created a library that was just for invoices and not mixed in with all my other documents for my team. Then I would say that in that library and that library alone, I want to make sure that when a user selects a document type, they can only select invoice to customer or vendor invoice, not any of these other things like agendas and minutes. So in that new library called invoices, I would change how the document type field or column is configured so that it would start from here. And the only options I would see would be these two. But because this library is set up to sort of be a catch-all for all the documents that the accounting team has worked on, the full set of document types are available for now for them to choose from.
Hey, Jim,
How's that? I'm done.
That's perfect, beautiful. Let's
Okay,
move to and show the audience how we design and ultimately deploy. And if we can do it in 3 or 4 minutes, I want to get to Robert, so we're going to move quickly. I'll kind of preface this by saying that what you're going to see is what we call our information architecture workbook, and this is a ShareSquared original. So this is the technology that we created to help have the conversation with customers about taxonomy. So we found before we had this, we would go and say, well, what kind of documents do you have? And they're like, I don't know. So we have this sort of very sophisticated workbook where we can have a conversation about what are the content types we ultimately need to build, what are the term sets, and a whole bunch of other stuff, which Jim will show you. And a lot of times when we're doing records management applications, we start with the retention schedule, and we're using that to build this spreadsheet, something we do with a customer. And then there's a deployment utility that deploys directly from this artifact. So this becomes a really great piece of documentation, but it's also used to drive the actual configuration in SharePoint or Office 365. So with that, Jim, why don't you do a 3-minute tour, and then we're going to jump to Robert as quick as we can. Sorry.
All right, thanks, David. So what's on my screen is the IA workbook for what we call our core IA, core information architecture. And I'm on a specific tab called the Matrix tab. It has a matrix style pivot table on it, where each row is a content type and each column is a piece of metadata, a field, a site column in SharePoint that's included in that content type if there's a corresponding dot in the intersection of those two. And I've drilled into just the invoice content type that we've been looking at so far. So you could build all that manually. Everything that we looked at today so far could be done manually in the browser. There are best ways to do that if you're doing it in the browser. But it's going to be a lot of work, a lot of clicking. And if you need to do it in a dev or test environment first, and before you do it in prod, hopefully you do it the same way in prod, that you follow the same steps, you click on the same things, and you type the same things in prod that you did over in test, so that it comes out the same. We collect all that information ahead of time instead in this, what we call an IA workbook. And we've already done that. We've got a starting point of 70 some content types developed over our last 12 years of experience asking that question, what are your content types? With the immediate response typically being, what is a content type? So that turned into a 3 to 6 month conversation just to get to this point. And we almost always ended up to a very similar point. So we just took all of that common stuff that everybody ends up with and put it into a starter pack that we can customize right before we deploy it to your environment. So this is the invoice content type. We've got quite a few over here. We've got a handout for a meeting, just a generic meeting handout. So it's got everything that's a global column and a meeting date. That makes sense. We've got a contract package, contractual document, which has all of our columns that everything else has. We call these the base columns or the global columns. But then for a contract, we've added an effective date, a contract number, a counterparty, and an expiration date. So a lot of taxonomy and information architecture pre-built. So you'll see as I zoom out, there's quite a bit here. This table is built on data that's in a few other tabs here. These are all the details of those content types, including their content type IDs and all of that kind of stuff. And then the content types are really just collections of site columns, at least for this conversation. So all of those are listed here, along with all of their settings. And then we have a deployment utility called IA deployment that can open that workbook, point to, well, it can't open it while I have it open. So I'll just open a different one. Yeah, we're done.
Yeah, we're gonna
Okay.
be done. So so we're gonna switch to a poll and then get on to Robert. The combination of the IA workbook and utility deploys to any number of environments. So if you have a test environment or we have to undeploy and redeploy. So it's a very useful piece of software, but it's useful in a great way in just defining the taxonomy, which is often the sticking point for people. And all of it can be customized. So the display names and everything would match your vernacular for what you call things. We just start with a certain foundation. So with that, I'm going to launch the next poll, and I'm gonna ask that you make this a rapid fire round of responses. So far we have 0. There we go. Somebody voted. If you would please just jump in so we can get on to the next demonstration or presentation and demonstration, that'd be great. We'll give it about 10 seconds. We're not doing anything, by the way, with this data. It's just sort of, so that the community that we're trying to build here can see where they are. And I will say that we would love to, if you're in the not addressed category, or maybe you've tried and you failed, or you're in design, we would like to talk to you. So reach out to us. I had a call the other day with somebody who came out of a webinar. Great conversation for an hour. I'm going to build an estimate, and she's just doing some research. They're not looking to transact business in the next year even. So we're happy to be of service in that way. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll now and share the results. So, kind of a distribution all over the place, but only 1%.
1%.
Really satisfy requirements. So that's interesting. So, really, again, we can help with this conversation. We got a 15-minute call, and we'd like to. So with that, I'm going to hide the poll, and we're going to move on to Robert. Now we got you under fire, Robert. Good luck.
No problem. It'll keep me honest.
Yes.
Yeah, can you guys just show the presentation again, please?
I'm sorry, my bad. I switched it too soon.
Yeah, I'd just like to go over quickly about why we do what we do, and then I'm going to get into a demo and show the nuts and bolts of auto classification.
Jim, you need to reshare it because I switched to Robert. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, I just really wanted to talk about it because, we've talked a little bit about auto classification, and you guys have outlined kind of the need for it, which is, of course, that we need a controlled vocabulary to be able to match our content with terms that are going to surface that content and make that content more usable. Jim showed us the struggles with poor titles and poorly ranked and utilized content, and how metadata can really help that, can show so much more and make that data so much more usable. Also, as David said earlier, we cannot trust our end users to do this. We've just seen from study after study that end user metadata is horrible. It's usually bad data, which is really worse than no data. So what Netrix does, and as David said, we were previously concept searching, and we've been doing this for about 17 years now, is what we do is we apply auto classification. So we'll go out and look at all of the content which is of course really great for scale, something that one user would take years to do, we can do in a matter of minutes. And collect all of that data in this kind of cycle, index that content, identify language, apply some machine learning in there, use our statistical index to identify what kind of content you have and what language your organization is using. Then expose that so that you can make rules to apply that controlled vocabulary that Jim showed us to the content you have. These are weighted clues, and I'll get into detail how we work that in our product. And then apply that classification and write those classifications back into SharePoint or onto the documents if that's what you need, and continue that cycle. So we always have good data, and it's done automatically so that our end users are not burdened by that or confused by that. Of course, this is managed by an administrator who understands the business goals, doesn't need to understand all of the content. That's a great thing about the tool, is we're going to allow you to use it to understand your content and also apply that taxonomy. Next slide, please, Jim. What makes us different from, there's always a lot of ways to slice a pie and a lot of tools out there, even coming from Microsoft themselves to help in this area. But things that we do differently and that we've had success with over the last 17 years is largely based around our statistical index, which is based on well-founded mathematical principles, which really understand language and will work in small data sets as well as very large data sets. So one of the key features we have is called compound term processing. I'll talk a little bit about that later. It allows us to understand phrases that are also terms and the context that they're in. Our product is technology agnostic. It installs in a Windows app platform. It supports very robustly things like SharePoint, but we can also connect to all sorts of different systems like file shares and NFS file shares, Windows file shares, SQL databases. We can get structured data, unstructured data, CMIS compliant systems like Laserfish, Alfresco, OpenText. So if you've got a lot of these assets, it's not just SharePoint you're using, we can actually help in all of those areas. Very robust with SharePoint though. We can do automatic meta tag generation and write those back into SharePoint. And we can really ultimately take your content and give it context. Next slide, please, Jim. This is my last slide, and it's just a little bit about this compound term processing because it's often kind of confusing and it is unique to our product. We can actually, because we use a statistical index, we can figure out what phrases are also terms. So our sales example here is triple heart bypass. We all know that that is one thing. That's a concept. It's a surgical operation. Doctor goes in, cuts open your heart, and does something with it. Maybe we don't know the details, but we know that that's one thing. Each of these terms, though, can have many meanings. So if you're just using tools where you're applying search queries to find matches, you can get into trouble with this ambiguity of the individual words. Example that I often give, because I think it matches better for us as records managers, is going out and trying to find all the policies in our organization. And I think maybe if you've tried this in SharePoint or the tools that support SharePoint, if we look for a policy, we're going to get every document that matches the word policy. And a lot of that is just going to be noise. So our compound term processing will allow us to identify things like policies and procedures, standard operating procedures, accepted policies, different phrases that can give meaning to the content that we actually have. So I'm good. Can you just make me presenter, and I'll present the actual live demo. And
you are presenter.
I'm going to show screen monitor 1, and you should be able to see it. So this is the nuts and bolts. This is our product that is going to go out and do that auto classification. Of course, you need a tool to do that, and this is what we provide. It's called Netrix Data Classification. It has many different uses. I'm going to focus on the records management part. The first step for setting it up, of course, is a web-based UI. You can get anyone can get access to it. There's a place where we can define users, but generally it's managed by a records manager or an information manager that wants to come in and apply that automatic classification against your content. The first step is to add your sources. We support, as I said, many different types of sources. You can see some of them here. I don't have all of them, but SharePoint, Exchange, Exchange Online, that also includes OneDrive and Teams are fully supported by the product. We go out like a search crawler and we collect the information and we build an index. So you can actually dig in and see all of the content we've collected. We collect a lot of information about these documents and we store it in our index so that you can see all of the different types of metadata that a document may have. So let me choose one that has some text in it. And you can see we store all of that, and that will help you make these classifications. It's really the important foundation that our index understands the content that you have. We also can apply natural language processing to extract things like dates, locations, those kinds of things to give you that added value for making classifications. Once we've collected all that information, we jump over to the taxonomy part. And this is really what Jim was showing you, that ShareSquared can provide with a structured taxonomy that will allow you to apply that data back. But how do you take that taxonomy and match that to your content? And that's where Netrix data classification comes in. We do provide a lot of taxonomies out of the box, but of course we can implement the taxonomy that ShareSquared provides. Just a quick example, let's say we're going to try to find those invoices. I have a file plan set up here. When we do that, you can import the taxonomy, and then you need to apply some rules to it. And sometimes people get daunted, well, how do I apply those rules? It's really simple. First of all, we can use our taxonomy manager, which connects to the SharePoint term store. So even if you have troubles using the SharePoint term store, this can be a way to make it a lot easier. And we're gonna try that one vendor invoice that Jim was showing us. We'll throw that in as a node. So now we have a classification for vendor invoice, which means when we match our rules, because we're connected to the term store in SharePoint, we can automatically write out that term vendor invoice. But how do I match what's a vendor invoice and what's not? Well, the first step is to give it a clue. These are called weighted clues, and they make up the rules that we have in order to make those classifications. It's really important that we use weighted clues. So a type of clue, there's a number of different types of clues we can use, and a value that goes with that clue. If the value of all of the clues that we've added here match up to above 50, which is an ISO standard, we're going to make that classification. If it's not, we're not going to make that classification. What this allows us to do is to get all of the content that we need to classify and only the right content. And that's really important because we don't want a lot of false positives. We want to know exactly which documents are the right documents and which ones are not, and then separate those, because false positives are just going to give us noise. It's going to be untrustworthy. We're not going to be able to actually do the classification, and we will be no better off than we were before. Once I've got at least one clue, I can actually ask our index to tell us what terms are really in our vernacular. We're not guessing here. We're not going out to subject matter experts and saying what should we put in here. We're actually asking our own content what terms we're using, what compound terms, and that goes back to that unique feature is important in our organization. And so I might use these as clues to help me define what is going to be a vendor invoice. And I might choose a few here. Vendor contact is a good one. Vendor number is a good one. And I'm going to make those standard clues. You can also see they've been automatically given a value. Some are higher than others. And that's based on their statistical relevance to the term that I added. I can save these. Now I've got my clues here. I can also add metadata clues or regular expressions if I'm looking for patterns, like patterns in words. I'll just show you an example of that in our out-of-the-box taxonomies for doing compliance. So if I want to find a MasterCard number, we've got some out-of-the-box regular expressions and different types of clues based in here. These come out of the box, so you don't have to make them yourself, but you can completely see how they work and everything they do to match credit, say for example, PII or PCI data. But if you're making your own classifications, you can add your own and define what those are here. And you can add them really quickly just by adding child terms. You can move these around, you can copy them, you can reuse them. It's super simple to use. So if I've got this classification for invoices here and I want to classify an invoice to a customer, I can build out those clues here as the document type. So this is very capable way to find and classify and work with that content. I can also use this to look at what content I've actually got classified and change my clues based on that to get the right content. Some people will say, well, this seems like a lot of work. I'm not gonna lie, it is a little bit of work, but because of the way that we've structured it and the tool set that we've given, it becomes very easy to get very good quality content and be very trustworthy of the classifications that you've got. And there's a process here where we can even simplify that by adding it to a positive or a negative working set in order to boost or demote a particular type of document in order to get that classified. These classifications, once they're written or once they're made, can either be written back to the document itself. So I'll show you an example of that if I've got a folder open here. So I can write it back to the document if it's a Word document, or if it supports metadata, that is. I can write that back to the document to get a look at what kind of document that is and keep that with the document. So if it's on a file share, we support PDF, Word documents. If it doesn't support properties like a text document, we're a little bit, we have to do something else, let's say. But if we look at this, you can see that we've stored this these properties in the metadata of this document. Oh no, the other screen. So I'll just show you what that looks like. This is not terribly beautiful because I haven't done a lot of work, but we've stored these properties in our custom metadata that we've made classifications for. And if you're using SharePoint, and this will be the last part of my demo, we can address anything in the questions part if you have some specific questions. If we are using SharePoint like Jim was showing with this, we can automatically apply this any kind of metadata that we want. We can also push content types, so we can change the content type of a document if you want. So as an example, I think I have a document that I've kind of shown as an example here. Like Jim said, it's got a bad name, maybe not a bad name, but not a great name. But it is actually an invoice, just one that I made up, stole from the internet. How do we figure out that that's going to be an invoice? We can't see it from its title. If we upload that to SharePoint, hopefully this works, just drag it there. We see that it's come here, and we're going to have to ask our end user to figure out what that metadata is. But with Netrix data classification, we've actually got an app in SharePoint. It's a very lightweight app. It's just JavaScript. It can go in here and look at the document. So it's going to trigger a classification, and that classification is going to go and figure out what this document is about. And it's going to apply that metadata from the rules that we've specified in the even I'm doing it, the Netrix NDC, and allow it to be classified back. So takes a second, but what will happen is the product will look at the content of the document, and decide whether this should, even though based on the title, it's not obviously an invoice, but look in the content and decide whether this should be an invoice or not an invoice, and then tag it appropriately. So my end user, my contract worker, doesn't have to do anything. They will just automatically see these rules updated based on the rule. And in relation to the example that Jim was showing earlier, we don't need to only do positive clues. We can actually do a negative clue. So if I want to, I can say something like guidance is a word that should have a negative clue. So things with guidance in the title, even though it says invoice in the title, should be demoted a little bit, and though we're not going to get those classified. So the whole idea is alleviate your end user from that complex and difficult classification, get the right content, the right metadata into that automatically, so that you don't have to worry about that, and then utilize that metadata to get better value out of your content. That's it for me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robert. I found it very interesting. Okay, so I'm going to run a quick poll again, and if you would try to respond quickly, and then we've got just a few minutes left, and then we'll move into the extended QA. And right now we don't have any questions. Oh, we do have one question. I'm sorry. So we'll try to answer as many as we can. But if when you're done responding to this poll, then please put some questions in as well if you're interested in asking some questions. And like I said, if we don't get to all of them today, then we will follow up with the QA via email. And again, I know I've made that promise in the past, but we're aggregating them all into a single response. Okay, I am going to close the polls now. I'm not going to show this one because this one is just about following up. And go back to Jim. I'm going to make you a presenter. And if you would go back to the presentation, and then we'll wrap up and move on with QA. Jim, are you? There you go.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Took me a minute to choose the correct screen. I have too many.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so we have some webinars coming up. You'll get an email about them. You're on our list. And if you have any that you want to recommend that you'd like to see, always feel free to email us. We did a poll a couple of webinars ago to get the next few, and we've got some ideas for some other ones. But we want to make sure that we're being of service to our audience. There's a few links here, so when we send out the link to the presentation, all of the items in blue you can click on. Obviously, you can't do that right now, but there's some information about Netrix for records management, manage metadata. That's a link to the Microsoft site, and then a link to the prior webinar presentations and recordings. Next, please. I've showed this slide before. Sometimes we get the question, who is ShareSquared? What's your role in this? So we're an implementation partner. We come in and implement these solutions. We also resell the various products. We've had Gimel as a partner on here, Harmony, and now Netrix. And common myth maybe being dispelled, we don't charge more than the vendor. So you don't have, feel free to come to us. We're going to bring you other ideas and things. The vendors are focused on their products, but we focus on some of the prerequisites like the taxonomy that you're going to need to implement a Netrix. So I think we could be a very valuable source to you if you want to come to us directly, and we can talk about these different products and help you with a solution, and anything from mentoring to actually doing the work. We want to engage with you. Next, please, Jim. And these are some of the things you could reach out to us about. We can, and I do these calls all the time. Jim, I'll bring Jim in if there's some more technical things. Again, he's a SharePoint Certified Master, so he's a great resource if you have questions. But just brainstorming, seeing a demo. I know we fly through these demos and we always cut into the vendor's time. Sorry, Robert. Get an estimate. We build these Excel-based estimates for projects all the time. Get pricing for products. Proof of concept, if you have Microsoft vouchers that come with your enterprise agreement, we can consume those and build a proof of concept. So that might be something you want to investigate with us. get a sample RFP solicitation. We have I think we have probably 12 RFPs on the board for the next 2 weeks. We look at them every morning. We have lots of experience both vetting them, reading them, responding to them. We can help you with providing a sample and also give you some ideas about how to run a more effective procurement. We know, I think, from doing it for so many years, what works and what doesn't. So we're happy to help with that. And then if you want reference projects and customers to find out, can you really do records management in Office 365, that kind of thing, we have a long list of customers that we've done different types of projects for. And with that, we will move into the QA. And I always have a hard time seeing this thing. Okay, we do have some questions. Oh, we got a lot of questions. I'm so sorry. Okay. First question is, how do we get a copy of the slides and record? That's going to come out in an email within a couple of days. Next question, can you let us know what the open source web part is for the search results showing normal, better, best, and invoices? Jim, that's you.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So if you just do a search on Bing or Google or whatever for modern search web parts, that's 4 words, modern search web parts, and then just add the letters PNP at the end. All 3 of those letters together. Those stand for patterns and practices. That is the open source initiative being led by major players on the product team, the SharePoint and Office 365, and now Teams, product teams at Microsoft. So it's kind of an open source community driven solution that's overseen, or I don't know, by Microsoft. I would say blessed by Microsoft. Anything that you get from the patterns and practices official GitHub is not technically supported by Microsoft, but it is supported by the Microsoft patterns and practices community, which sometimes knows more about things than Microsoft. Anyway, so that will help you find those. Modern search web parts, PNP. And if it looks like it's too much to get those downloaded and installed and you want our help, just let us know.
Perfect. Okay, so I have to apologize. There were a number of questions entered and I didn't have it popped out, so I didn't see that a number of people were not able to see Robert's screen for some period of time. So I apologize for that. Looks like a lot of those people left already. So, if any of you are still on, hopefully the recording will have that. I was able to see it fine, so I'm not sure what was going on there. But if not, and you want to have a demo for your organization, just reach out to us and we'll do that. I'm not sure what happened there, but it was a lot of people. So yeah, so it was an issue. It looks like a little bit for Jim too at some point. Okay, here's the next one. It seems like the IA workbook walkthrough is generally rushed on these webinars. That's true. Could that be addressed with a separate webinar covering SharePoint setups? I just like that workbook quite a bit. So the answer to that person has left, but the answer is yes. And yeah, we are jam packing these and I don't know the answer to that. We're trying to provide a lot of background and context, and I tend to talk too long, I guess. But in any case, yes, we will do a session. That's one of the webinar ideas I had just this morning was to do a series that is, here's how we construct a solution. So we've been cutting it more along the lines of a sort of technology or technique, but more like, here's how we do design. Here's how we do
case management. Here's how we build a case management solution.
Exactly. Here's how we deploy the portal structure. Here's how we develop the taxonomy, and we would cover the IA workbook then. So if you're interested in that, hopefully, I think we will do that. Hopefully you'll join. Next one is, how does the assignment of the score or value get determined? What does a score of 50 mean? And this person has left, unfortunately, but for the rest of the audience, Robert, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. 50 is really just an ISO standard. We can change it if you want to make it 100. But the scores that we suggest are based on that as kind of the threshold and the statistical relevance to the other phrases and terms that are in there. If you're working with it yourself, you need to kind of do some how you say, make some tries, make some guesses, if you will, and put in the phrases that you want to promote or demote, and then see in the working set what's happened. Is that good enough to put it through this threshold? The product can also show the movements. So if we have one document we know is bad and we want it to drop just below the threshold, we maybe will give it minus or drop the value that it has for that clue. And then something that we want to add, we can increase the value for that clue, and then classify it again, and then look at the movements and see how things have moved up and down. It's really a quick process, and if we work on a working set, like a small amount of documents, it'll become very clear as to what is going to give good classifications, what's going to give bad. And once we've got that working, we can launch the product against the whole corpus and kind of apply those rules out against everything and be really trusting that it's going to work.
Perfect. Looks like you've got some work here, Robert. These are pretty much all for you.
Yeah.
How do you audit the classifications to make sure you're getting good results and not so much noise?
So yeah, like I showed you, there was this browse section where you can go in and see exactly what was classified. We can also generate reports. So if you've got a lot more data, we can generate large Excel sheets with all of the documents in it, and then add associated metadata with that. This can allow us to maybe put into Power BI or just look through the Excel to try to find unmatched documents. So the reason why the metadata can be helpful with that is we can extract maybe some of this metadata that was also applied to the product manually or applied to the content, sorry, either manually or in SharePoint, to let us maybe pull out those anomalies. But really that browse section is going to show us how things were weighted and how they were classified, and things that were maybe, there's also a feature where you can see things that were almost classified or almost not classified, and then that'll help us give that view of where that threshold should be and how those rules should be applied.
Perfect. I can field the next one. It's a Netrix question, but it's an easy one. Does the Netrix data classification tool create and associate documents to the content type in SPO? Now it says create and associate, so I'll let you take it. Does Netrix data classification tool create and associate documents to the content type in SPO?
So we don't create the content. You can have it either, in file shares or in SharePoint or whatever. But what we're going to do is classify it, and then we can push the content type out to it. One thing we can also do is move the content. I'm not going to use the term migrate because that means often kind of more aggressive lift and shift kind of movement. But let's say you've got a bunch of content in another system or maybe on file shares, and you want to surgically go in and find, say, all the contract in that terabytes of file share. We can go in and pick those out like little gold nuggets in the stream, and then move those into SharePoint, apply a content type to them, and then let them live in SharePoint with the metadata that we've classified.
Great. Does Netrix allow an auto-suggest model, i.e. it suggests the classification but lets users change that if needed?
No, not at this point. Our goal is to alleviate the user suggestion. With that said, once we've done that classification in the product or in SharePoint, let's say we've added the invoice metadata, if a user wants to change that and they do go and change that metadata, we're not going to overwrite that unless you explicitly tell it to, because we're trusting that the end user's judgment is going to be better. But we want to alleviate that task from the end user because, as you said, they're just choosing asbestos. They don't want to choose it. And really, we should know, if our clues are written properly, we should know more about that document than the end user is going to know just from maybe looking at the title.
Perfect. Does a user uploading a file to SPO need to classify, or will Netrix data classification tool auto-classify? If so, how will an admin set that up?
It's all automatic. The administrative part is to add our SharePoint app, which is a simple Office 365 app, or also supports on-premises. So once that app is activated on the site collection, and you define which, in data classification, you define which fields you want it to to apply to. Once you've done that, it'll all be automatic so that when the document is uploaded, we'll get a message from SharePoint. We'll go out and request that document, download it, open it up, look through it, apply all the classifications that are necessary, and write back the ones to the managed metadata fields that we have been told to.
Great. What percentage of documents remain unclassified after being run through NDC?
Ooh, that's a good question. And that really is determined by the taxonomies that you use. I think maybe a better way to talk about it is what level of quality classifications we have. So for example, if I'm only looking for invoices, everything that's not an invoice is going to remain unclassified. Product comes with a lot of out-of-the-box taxonomies, so you can do things like classify all the documents against what type of file type they are. But you don't have to, right? We could only put in the invoice one, and then we would just surgically go out and find the invoices. But there is a associated question that we get, which is, what's the quality of the classification? And normally when we start with some basic taxonomies, we start at about 80% classification accuracy, which means that out of 100 documents, 80 of them are properly classified. Using the tools like the suggest clues and the browse and the promotion and demotion that I showed, we can very easily get that above 90% and perhaps 95% of all of the documents that we're classifying are accurately being classified. There's always going to be a few that don't really fit the patterns and they don't fit in, but our goal is to get to as close to 100% as we can. And that's why the product is open. You can see what's happening, you can understand the rules. It's not an AI technology that's doing whatever it's doing. It's completely open so you can understand how it's working and make sure that it's going to be doing the job for you 100%.
Okay, next one for you. Could this product be applied to a federal agency's records repository built on FileNet?
Yes. Yes, we've done work. We do a lot of work with the federal government, so we've got some very large federal customers as well, including both the US federal government and the military. So I'd love to talk more about those customers and what we've done for them. FileNet is a little bit tricky. I don't think we have an out-of-the-box connector, but we can usually get into these. I think we've done FileNet projects before because we will go into the database or through a web UI and collect that information and then push back the content through our open APIs.
Perfect. Jim, this is for you if you're still paying attention. Does SharePoint Server have the ability to limit the term set to a specific range of terms for a specific list or library that you showed in SharePoint Online? So I think we're talking about SharePoint Online, but limiting the term set. I think we're talking about anchored term sets. Is that right?
Yeah, what if I'm not still paying attention? Anyway.
Then I'll try to answer it, or I'll throw it at Robert.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So yeah, in the demo, I talked about limiting the options, the selections that a user has in a managed metadata field in a specific library, but I didn't demonstrate it. But what you want to search for is called the anchor term. So one of the settings on a column definition of a type managed metadata is not just the term set to pull the terms from for the pick list, but which term, all the way down to a specific term you can select in that little selector. And when you do that, that's called the anchor term, and only the terms that are below it will be selectable. Don't pick a bottom level term that doesn't have any children as your anchor term, because then nobody will be able to select any data for that column. So that's just something to remember when you're configuring that. But what you want to search up for is how to set the anchor term for a list or library, for a managed metadata field in a list or library.
Great. Robert, last question for you. How do you convince people that auto classification will not do more mistakes than classification made by end users? I love that question. Go ahead.
Oh, that is a good question. I've never had that question before. And I think the protection against that is the ability to see what's going to be classified before you actually push those classifications out. We always try to do a process with the customers where we work with some sample content. We do a dev environment test so that we make sure that the classifications we're written are going to be accurate, because we don't want to write back garbage and then have that, as you say, pollute the organization. So it's a good question, and it's a good concern, but we have that built in the process. So we make sure that the things we are classifying are being classified accurately, and then apply it to the entire corpus.
Yeah, and I'll say from our experience, end users just don't want to do this. I mean, they just don't want to. They never had to do it when they were storing documents to the file system. They don't have to do it when they throw an attachment on an email. This is so eventually they start to get the value from search. Most end users, I know we got some records managers on here, don't care about records management. That's just not their thing. They'll certainly come to a records manager with a problem, but they don't want to be part of the solution necessarily. So, they will eventually, it's a bit of a culture change, start to do a better job adding metadata to documents, but to the degree that they can be left out of it, they would like to be. That's just the reality of it. So when you compare the results you'll get with an auto classification engine like Netrix versus end users, I think it's not just a question of accuracy as much as it's a question of willingness. And the engine is going to do it reliably and even reliably wrong, so you can correct it. But it's just we just see much better results than end users doing it in general, because they just don't want to. And sometimes they just don't know what to do. So that's been our empirical sort of experience. So with that, the last question was a comment, and it just said, thank you, this was great, and looking forward to, oh my gosh, people put in more. Okay, hold on, we'll do two more. How is Netrix different from, okay, I'll answer this one. How is Netrix different from Collabware, CollabSpace? All of the records management add-ons, so that'd be Gimel, Collabware, and RecordPoint, are adding their own classification engines. Gimel just came out with one about a month ago called Altitude. RecordPoints is maybe 8 to 12 months old, and Collabware's got it. So they're different kind of animal. They're using more that black box machine learning, and you don't have visibility or control into how the classification is happening. So that we think that technology will get more mature. I was sitting on a meeting this morning about Project Cortex, which is Microsoft's promise to get into this arena, but the call was really about changes to SharePoint and the administrative interfaces for the managed metadata and content types and things like that, and publishing. So they're not there yet either. The records management add-ins like Collabware are just calling into some machine learning engines to do that. And I know RecordPoints, you put about 200 documents in for each record category or type of document, so 200 contracts in, and it starts to try to learn from that. And then it's not auto classification. They show you a screen where you can say, yeah, you got this one right, or no, you got that wrong. And it starts to learn over time. But they all have kind of ways to go. And again, they are these black boxes that you don't really have control over, because these are third-party engines. None of those products are based on their own intellectual property, unlike Netrix. So right now, today, our opinion is Netrix is going to give you better results, and you have more visibility and control over them. Next one is, are there examples of how retention policies, data loss prevention, and labeling in Office 365 works in conjunction with NDC? Do you want to hit that one, and then we probably should close up.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last one?
Are there any examples of how retention policies, data loss prevention, and labeling in Office 365 works in conjunction with NDC? So how do you work with labels and things like that?
Well,
that's a great
I'll
question.
I can take a first stab at it. So related to our RM deploy utility, David, we have come up with a way to have the retention labels, the Office 365 built-in retention labels, apply automatically to content based on the value in the document type field, or whatever whatever managed metadata field or fields you're using to match it up with your labels. So if Netrix is setting the value of the document type field, and the document type field is what you're using to determine the label to apply to that document, that's how the two would work together from a conceptual standpoint.
Even more direct than that, we support MIP labels. So as a workflow, so we can apply labels to SharePoint based on any kind of rule that we apply. So if we're looking for sensitive content, we have some rules that we can apply as clues, like I showed, and we make a classification, say the classification is sensitive, we can actually push that out into labels in Office 365. So you can tag them automatically as sensitive content, and it'll apply that label to Office 365. Same with the retention labels, so we can apply those out as well.
Excellent. All right, guys, thank you. Thank you for the remaining people who are still there. We went even longer than we expected. And we love it that you show up each time we have a webinar, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.